Hi. I just want to say right out of the gate that this episode is not for everyone. Um, this one is really dependent on where you're at in your grief journey. If your loss is still fresh and you still feel like you're still, just hemorrhaging emotion every minute of every day, then this is definitely not the one for you. Um, this is for people who have been living with and carrying their grief for quite some time. So I just wanted to point that out right from the beginning because this one is it's tricky. It's very tricky. I've mentioned before that when my wife Sarah passed away, that I had gone into therapy because I knew it was something I couldn't handle, work through, deal with, whatever you want to call it, on my own. Um, I started off going to therapy once a week. Um, Eventually, I transitioned over to every other week, and I had been doing every other week for a while when at some point in my therapy, my therapist asked me an extremely difficult question. It was at the end of one of our sessions, and she said, between now and when I came back, that she wanted me to put some real thought into this, and she challenged me to name one positive thing that may have come from Sarah's passing. I did not like that question. I was extremely resistant to it. When I consider it, it felt meant like it was minimizing her loss. It felt premature. It felt by even trying to look at something like that, like it was betrayal. I didn't feel betrayed by Chris. I had been in therapy with her long enough that we had built up quite a good level of trust. So I didn't feel betrayed by Chris, but I somehow felt like I would be betraying Sarah by even considering this. Um, at this point, I just want to make it entirely clear that this episode is not about justifying loss. Nothing can justify that. So I just want to make that clear. Um, because I trusted Chris, even though it was extremely uncomfortable for me, um, over the the next couple weeks, I honestly did think about it. Um, there's the things that you often hear about in a anecdotal way, almost like bumper sticker philosophy. It'd be easy to say what I came up was, gratitude for, the people I loved who are still in my life. That was certainly there. But that was there anyway. It wasn't personal growth because Lord knows I didn't want to grow like that. And it wasn't even having a different perspective. If you've watched my other videos in the grief series, you'll know that I have a long history of loss in my family, and that it is something that I struggled with over the years. That honestly, I had many mental health issues when I was younger that should have had the help of a professional, but instead I just kind of muddled through them on my own. One of these is that losing the people I love became my greatest fear. And I'd have many fears in my life, like claustrophobia, what have you. But this really became my greatest fear. And when I say that, it's not just like one of those fears that gnaw at the back of your mind and keep you awake at night. I'll give you an example. talked in some of my other videos about my first wife, Farrell. And this is when Farrell and I were just roommates. And she and a friend had borrowed my car to go to a small local amusement park that was about an hour and a half away from where we lived at the time. Um, Even though we were just friends at the time, I was already in love with Farrell, and but at the time, it just seemed like nothing would amount to it more than friendship. And so when she borrowed the car, she said, we should be home. She said the park closes. I'm making up like the time because I can't remember exactly, but we'll say the park closes 11 p.m. So we should be home about 1 a.m. 1 a.m. rolls around, and like no one's pulling into the parking lot. 1:30 rolls around, and by this point, I'm really starting to get nervous. I'm continually peeking out the window, checking to see, if there's headlights pulling into the parking lot. By 2 p.m., I'm saying p.m., but actually it's a.m. because it was at night, so I apologize. But at 2 a.m., I had worked myself into a tizzy. I was pacing like all over the house, just a little ball of anxiety and tension, and I was positive that something horrible had happened, that there had been a car accident, or I even went as far as calling every hospital along the route between where we lived and the amusement park to see if she'd been admitted. When that turned up fruitless, I even called the state police to see if there'd been any accidents with my vehicle on the road, and of course there wasn't. At some point, she got home. Because I had become so good at compartmentalizing my emotions, I was able to shove those deep down inside. By the time she got upstairs and came into the apartment, I was just trying to play it off like I was, calm and relaxed, and like hadn't been a problem. Like, oh hey, how was the park? So yeah, I had some very deep-seated neurosis when it came to losing people I love, like quite literally my greatest nightmare. And that is actually what led me to find an answer to Chris's question. I basically came to the conclusion that if I could live through Sarah's passing, if I could survive what literally was my worst friggin' nightmare, that quite honestly, I could survive anything that the world would throw at me from that point on. Now, framed alchemically, this whole process is calcination, where basically anything that can't endure is burned away. In my case, my grief burned away assumptions. I'd assumed that I would grow old with Sarah. I remember she was telling me one time that she wished we would have found each other earlier in life, so we could have loved each other longer. Our relationship started well into our lives, middle ages. And I told her at that point in time that if we lived until we were 80, that we would basically have our entire lives to live over again in each other's company. And my assumption was that would be the way it would play out, never once realizing that we would have a little over half a decade together. Grief also burns away illusions of control, and grief also burns away certain versions of yourself, even if you did not realize it was a version of yourself. I have a passage from one of my fictional books I wrote kind of decades ago, and it's actually quite germane to this conversation. And I was just wanting to read a little bit of that to you. It's just a passage. For a bit of context, the narrator that you'll hear in this is lying in a shack. He's slowly bleeding to death and knows that there is no hope for rescue or survival. And so he is left alone with his thoughts on mortality. The way I see it, a person can reincarnate 100 times within the span of a single life. But there ain't nothing mystical about it. There ain't no divine plan guiding the way. It's all about having an experience so damn intense that it seeps into every pore and every cell of your being. And it changes you. Sometimes slowly, sometimes so quickly that you're left feeling as dazed as if you had just been struck by lightning. But the change happens, and you come out the other side as someone other than the person you were before. Hell, you don't even look the same in the mirror anymore. Your eyes seem a bit older, hopefully wiser, and the emotions left over from this here experience bring out new expressions that resculpt your features. You see lines and shadows that weren't there just a day earlier, slight variations in your complexion, and the contrast between your skin tone and the stubble growing across your chin. Even your voice sounds different. And at some point, you realize that the reason for all this is that the old you is now dead. You've been reincarnated, and it didn't take your whole dang body kicking the bucket to bring it about. Now, I'd always liked that particular passage. I thought when I first wrote it, I thought it was just a nice little bit of writing. But over the years, it's really occurred to me how much truth there was in that passage. And so, yeah, when Sarah passed, a part of me did pass with her. But even though a part of me passed, something still remained. It wasn't untouched, it wasn't unscarred, but it was still intact at the core. And quite honestly, that is the alchemical gold. Let me clarify that statement. I'm not saying that Sarah's loss was a gift. I'm not saying that the suffering I went through was necessary. And if I could undo it, I definitely would. So, that's not what I'm saying at all. What emerged wasn't any type of compensation for what I'd been through. It wasn't even really strength. What it truly was a capacity for resilience. Because like it or not, ordinary life continued on. I still had bills to pay. I still had duties to perform at work. I still had family. Life just continues on. Survival isn't glamorous. In fact, it's grueling. It's repetitive. It's putting one foot in front of the other when you're so weary and all you want to do is just lay down and rest. It's breathing again tomorrow, even when today felt like it crushed your soul out of your very body. And me is slow like that sometimes. I'm not saying you have to search for a positive. And I'm definitely not saying to, rush toward finding some sort of meaning. But if one day you realize, I survived this, please know that realization is not a betrayal to the one you loved. It's just simply evidence of your own resilience. And in alchemy, that's where the gold is often found. Not in what the fire creates, but in what it fails to destroy. Now, rather than talking abstractly about this, I'd like to invite you into something simple. It's not a grand ceremony. It's not a moment of forced meaning. It's just a small act of acknowledgement for what you've walked through and also for what's still standing. So let's take a few minutes here to honor what remains without rewriting what was lost. For this, you just need three very basic supplies: a small candle, bowl of water, a small stone that has some heft to it. And you'll want to sit somewhere quiet and place the candle in front of you with the bowl beside it and hold the stone in your hand. As you light the candle, say, "This is the fire I walked through." And let your grief be present. There's no need to soften it, no need to give it any type of narration or, to frame it in any way. We're simply here just to acknowledge it, that it exists, that it's part of us. So while you're doing that, just, look into the flames for a few slow, deep breaths. When you're ready, dip your finger lightly into the bowl of water, touch your forehead or your heart, and say, "This is the sorrow that washed over me." Now you'll let yourself remember that grief comes in waves. Sometimes the waves can be sort of gentle. Other times they are, quite honestly, overwhelming, more like an emotional tsunami. There's no need to relive it here. We are just here to simply witness it, just to observe. Next, you'll want to hold the stone firmly in your hand and concentrate on its weight. Concentrate on how solid it is. While you're doing that, say, "This is what remained." After that, you'll take a moment to pause and just notice your body. Notice the weight of your body. Notice your breath. And know that you survived. Again, you weren't unscathed. You weren't unchanged. But you are still here. You are still present. And that's really the truth that we just want to let settle into us at this part of the ritual. Again, when you're ready, place the stone beside the candle and turn your attention to the flame again. While still mindfully breathing, say, "The fire didn't incinerate me. The water didn't dissolve me. Something in me endured." Then you'll just want to sit in silence for a few breaths. And don't try to force emotion. Like the stone, just let the steadiness and solidity of your own body register with you. When you feel the time is right, extinguish the candle gently. As the smoke rises, say, "I honor what was lost, but I also honor what remains." You can then leave the stone somewhere visible for a few days if you'd like. Not as any type of trophy, or I can't think of any other word, but not as any type of trophy, just as like a quiet piece of evidence, if that makes sense. If you've walked the path I've walked, then I'm sure that probably does make sense. After you complete the ritual, there's no requirement to come out of it feeling empowered. No, there's no need to declare yourself stronger or transformed. Sometimes the only truly honest truth is you survived, you endured, you're still here. It doesn't justify the fire, and it certainly doesn't redeem the pain. It simply recognizes that something within you persisted. If you ever find yourself questioning your capacity, if you ever wonder whether you can survive what comes next, remember that you already have that evidence. You're sitting here, you're breathing, you're still here. and that is no small feat. So honor what was lost. Honor too what remains. Walk gently, and, of course, walk in peace and light, my friend.